Day 923 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 618,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,360 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 10 tanks, 35 APVs, and 18 artillery. Then we'll head to the map with what a busy weekend in Russia it was, as over 100 Ukrainian drones swarmed the Russian capital of Moscow and the Oblast. For instance, a Ukrainian UAV strike hit the Moscow oil refinery and forced the shutdown of its Euro Plus oil processing plant, halting half of the refinery's operations despite earlier Russian claims that the drones were intercepted. Also note that the Euro Plus unit is named for its ability to produce high-quality fuels that are designed to meet strict European environmental standards. The unit is also known to produce specific kerosene jet fuel known as TS1 used for Russian military jets. Then also over the weekend, a Russian government building was on fire just 3 kilometers from the Kremlin. Then to the Russian Tver Oblast, just northwest of Moscow, as Ukrainian drones successfully struck the Kanikovo power station and a nearby gas distribution network, thereby igniting fires at one of the largest power plants within Russia. So at this stage, I would expect an even colder winter for Russia this year than they had last year. And I must say, if Russia thinks that the strikes on infrastructure carried out by Ukraine is temporary, then it has some further surprises in store for itself, as the writing's on the wall, with Ukraine most recently stating that if you, Russia, attack our infrastructure, we will deliver a measured and proportional response to your actions. And now they can. But then also in the motherland, a Russian Mi-8 helicopter was reportedly lost after a flight on the border between Kursk and the Buryatia regions, getting close to Siberia. And this event follows on from another Russian Mi-8 helicopter that went down in the very far east of Russia over the weekend. Now, these events are not expected to be related to any Ukrainian sabotage events, but having said that, these events could surprisingly be related to Ukraine if or where the issues were to be mechanical engine failures, given that the engines for the Mi-8 helicopter are produced by the Ukrainian company Motor-Sich. Specifically, the Mi-8 is typically powered by the TV3-117 engine, and the same goes for the Russian Ka-52 attack helicopters, their flagship attack helicopter, mind you. So, as a result of some obvious and recent geopolitical tensions in the region, this has led Russia to pursue the development of domestic alternatives that would simply not perform at the same levels, with the lack of specialization on Russia's part. Then taking a look on the map to the Kursk region and the Lvov operational direction, as there are some continued rumors that suggest that Ukraine is further ahead north than this map would indicate. Although this is most likely smaller reconnaissance units, though most recently it appeared that Russian border forces stationed south of Lvov opened fire on one of their own controlled villages in the southern direction, mistaking it for some of these Ukrainian reconnaissance elements in this case. Not good. Add in that, the Russian war correspondent, Spanikov, who also said that it's not the first time something like this has happened. In fact, another Russian serviceman shared on Telegram about his interactions with the Kursk territorial defense units, describing the situation as complete chaos, with the territorial defense forces more likely to harm each other than the Ukrainians. Perhaps somewhat unsurprisingly, he also went on to state that a lot of these members of these border force units are in constant states of paralyzing panic, imagine Ukrainians everywhere, and thus growing suspicious of their fellow Russians. Then headed across to the western district in Kursk, as all attempts by the Russian army to establish pontoon bridges over the Sime River have now become methodically targeted by Ukrainian artillery, but also drones and HIMARS, with at least 5 pontoon units being destroyed so far. Now at the moment, even Russian channels say that around 3,000 Russian troops are in this pocket, completely surrounded by the river and the Ukrainian forces. Oh, and just back to a moment ago, because I do mean methodical, as we see Russian truck after Russian truck that provides the logistical means for these pontoon installations that keeps getting picked off, seemingly one by one north of the river. And although I don't know the precise location for these examples, I could all but guarantee that they were traveling south to the river from the main road. See if we can find it. Dark mode will help in this case, so back and forth, there we go. So we've got the river here, Gloshkovo there, and the main road from the north, as these still shots that I'm showing you are all from the same 1 minute of footage. A haunting trail of destruction, which should suggest that this is not a safe road to travel on. Then on this part of the map, we also saw Ukrainian air assault forces manage to capture another modern Russian T-80 BVM main battle tank during their offensive in the Kursk Oblast. And so that makes for the 7th capture of a Russian tank now, which once again continues to make Russia Ukraine's #1 supplier of tanks, with obtaining at least 600 plus tanks now throughout the larger conflict. Then, as is related to this region, Belarus continues its own military flex with newly posted images of them sending armored vehicles to the southern border as a means of a feint and bluff to attempt to make the AFU panic and pull their forces out of Kursk. Though I strongly doubt their president Lukashenko can attack without risking his power, and by association, without risking the luxury lifestyle he's become accustomed to over 30 plus years. The old boy's been in power a long time now. Then headed on the map to the Pokrovsk direction with no substantial changes in the region over the past few days, or something that amounted to about 1 square kilometer per day over the last 3 days. Though, irrespective of these small gains or any larger ones, the armed forces of Russia are certainly paying for the pleasure of invading here, with well above average heavy armor losses reported for this region as they approach the front lines. In fact, as a somewhat related statistic, from the report of the work of a part of the Ukrainian Madar Birds unit, which is operating in the Donbass, showed that for August 2024, they destroyed 778 targets, when usually it's around the lower figure of 500. But they also stated that that's all you need to know about the intensity of clashes in their area of operation. In fact, right nearby at the Kurakova direction, Russian blogger Podolaka is surprised by the losses Russia experiences here. In fact, it's best to use his words as he states, quote, "daily stupid attacks and waste of a lot of personnel and equipment." As he also goes on to blame some general for this, who says that all the general really wants is some Hero of Russia award. But ultimately, he signs off from this post saying that he's chosen to post this material because he doesn't know where else to turn in the hope that someone will take action, and that these meat waves, or these highly attritional meat waves, somehow find a way to stop. Then headed further south, as Russian attacks on the Volodar area remain high, though not exactly precisely head-on, as Russia is working both the east and the western flanks, making some marginal gains in the Vodiana direction, and a bit further east at the village of Preshestivka. And it is interesting, this western front to Volodar, that it's changed the hands of control a number of times now. Then taking a look around on the map, because somewhere in the east and south, so we saw the destruction of a number of Russian boats on the Dnipro River. Now, these have become increasingly unsafe waters for the invaders, with effectively zero chance of reaching to the northern bank again. Although their highest hope here would be to take the Delta Islands. Then, also in the east, we saw a HIMARS strike on a Russian S-300 radar, and what looked like a loitering munition strike on a S-300 launcher as well. Then we also saw the tracking and destruction of a fully loaded Russian BM-21 Grad MLRS, so the multiple launch rocket systems. And then also, a little bit of a different one here, but somewhere in the east, we saw the Russian army's use of a D-20 howitzer, but with an even more stationary utilization, more so than what this towed howitzer would normally be accustomed to, as it was seen missing its wheels that should be at the loading base axle. Also note, the D-20 howitzers are the Soviet 152mm artillery platforms, with this one and others in recent times reported to be manned by just 2 Russian artillerists, where instead there should be 7 or 8. Meaning, less personnel, slower firing rates. It's really not going to help with accuracy either. Then also in the east, Ukraine continues to up their drone capabilities with the example of this thermite incendiary charge, making it look like a glowing radioactive man walking through the tree line. Or a Dracarys fire breathing from Game of Thrones. What will become of this technology? Well, it's more of an innovation, but a pretty serious one at that. Then swinging back into Russia briefly, as after burning for 16 days, satellite imagery of Russia's now extinguished Protolarsk oil storage complex shows extensive damage with several tanks destroyed. These comparisons show from August 16 to September 2nd, about 30 oil tanks destroyed. Then headed across to some news with truly more Russian economy news than you can poke a stick at. And all of it not painting any sort of rosy outlook or positive economic picture for Russia. So in a listing off fashion, firstly, Russia is reported to be upping its central bank rate from a whopping 18% already to 19% in this coming September 13. And so at these sustained levels or increasing levels, it's likely to have severe consequences for the economy that could cause widespread financial distress, including bankruptcies, unemployment, and a sharp decline in economic growth. Also for the cost of borrowing, which would become prohibitively expensive, leading to a collapse in investment and spending. And then, of course, sustained rates at these levels are typically a sign of impending inflation or hyperinflation, which can lead to weighing the currency by the pound to get any value out of it, or in some cases, by the barrel. And that would not be an economy. Instead, it would be a decaying society. Then to some more economy news. Russia has stopped disclosing data on oil production, and Russia would do this for many a reason, including obscuring the impact of sanctions, an ability to influence price in a manner that might aid or favor Russia, and then for an overall lack of transparency to manage perceptions and maintain control. You see, weak data does not look good for Putin, and this is likely all due to Russia facing challenges in maintaining its oil production levels, either due to an age in infrastructure, lack of investment, or difficulties in accessing necessary technology and equipment due to sanctions, plenty of which comes from the West, leading it to not want to disclose this type of data at all, as it would signal weakness for the Kremlin. Then keeping on with the Russian economy news, Serbia just signed a $3 billion deal to purchase 12 Rafale fighter jets from France, marking a significant shift away from its traditional reliance on Russian military jets. Serbia was considering purchasing additional MiG-29 fighter jets from Russia, as these jets have formed the backbone of Serbia's air force for decades. But realistically and bluntly, you can't buy something that's no longer for sale. Of course, Russia's military export market has tanked in the past 2 years after their initial invasion of Ukraine. They need everything they can get themselves. Then in some more related news, from the economy front, as straight from the horse's mouth, internal Russian media reports show that Russia is dealing with a labor crunch, unable to find workers throughout a diverse range of industries. And where this is most noted is within industrial manufacturing enterprises, with a labour shortage of 87%. And yet, with an overall labour shortage of 4.8 million workers leading into 5 million, Russia still continues to fuel the fire of their meat grinder efforts in Ukraine, thereby causing their Ministry of Labour to intervene and try to poach guest workers from overseas, India, Africa, Thailand, Vietnam, among other nations. But noting also that Russia's private industry, if we can call it that, also has competition from the Russian MOD, who attempts to poach those very same workers into a military contract in Ukraine. It's just a mess on top of another mess. Then to take a bit of a breather from some of Russia's economic woes, we see how Putin recently addressed a group of students for some PR reason, claiming that Russia wants to resolve all of the SMO by peaceful means, and that it never refused peaceful negotiations, but that it is necessary to deal with the bandits who have infiltrated the territory of the Russian Federation in Kursk, who in turn attempt to stabilize the border areas. That's Putin speaking, not me. Where he's seeming to say that there can be no peace talks as long as Ukraine holds Russian territory, which would therefore mean that the conditions for peace talks were on the table for 2 years. And there's even more to unpack here. With, of course, the hypocrisy of Russia crossing the border into Kharkiv and everywhere else for that matter in Ukraine. Oh, and not to mention, Putin actually seems to be calling it a border now, where Russia otherwise is meant to have no borders. I believe the Russian posters say, Russia's borders end nowhere. But realistically, out of all of this, Putin's version of peace is simply getting what it wants on its own terms. So it's very difficult to take any of their words on the matter seriously, being truly rife with hypocrisy. Then headed across to a couple of quick funnies to round it all off for today, guys. So the first one is a bit of a lowbrow funny, perhaps. But right here, you can tell that the Russian Eastern Orthodoxy Church is, how do you say, a little bit completely corrupted by the Kremlin. As Russia's religious leaders are going as far as to spout that war is the most important thing, as they try to motivate regular Russians on a consistent basis now into signing up to the Russian army. Which is better than, as this example seems to point out, better than dying in a hospital from conditions unrelated to a military event. Corruption finding its way into every corner of Russian society. Then to a final quick funny to round it all off for today, guys, as these are examples of extreme measures of cybersecurity in Russian units. A wall of phones taken from Russian military personnel. Problem is, cell phones are like ants hiding deep behind your kitchen sink, and they just keep coming if you only squash the ants themselves. And so Russia's attempts to hide the grim realities of their SMO through these recent but continued means has still not gone any real way to hide the embarrassments and the mistakes that their army has continued to put on display. So this is just a complete exercise in futility. Plus, it's a bit late for that now. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks for watching. I've not been in for the last few days. Massive computer problems, hardware drive crashes, backups, you name it. I pretty much had it. But getting back into the swing now. So please continue to like, support, all of those nice things. I really do appreciate it. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.